kind, and good morning, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I was going to plug our podcast, but Jonathan already did that, so thank you very much. I'm not going to give you a lengthy speech. That will be up to our participants, but hopefully we'll try to contain all the enthusiasm that they have and move on. We have quite a long list of questions that we want to get through this morning. You know, I just do want to say, though, as a parent, as a student, as a former teacher, not in your public school system, but a teacher, I can appreciate all the questions that are being put to our panelists this morning, and I want to thank you for arranging us, the ATA, and for all the political parties that we see here represented today, so thank you very much for taking part. Let's start off with an introduction, our panelists, and in no particular order, starting off with the Honourable David Eggen on my immediate left. He is the Education Minister for the NDP and MLA and candidate for Edmonton Northwest. Stephen Mandel. I'm going to ask you to hold your applause, ladies and gentlemen, until the end, because this is a forum, not a political rally, so we just want to try and keep that in check. Stephen Mandel, the leader of the Alberta Party. Mark Smith, the education critic for the United Conservative Party and MLA and candidate for Drayton Valley Devon. David Kahn, the Alberta Liberal Party leader and candidate for Calgary Mountain View. And Jeff Rout from the Freedom Conservative Party and candidate for Leduc Beaumont. Now you can applaud. Thank you. We are going to have opening statements from each panelist, and we are going to have 3 themed sections to the prepared questions, and then some extra questions at the end. And I understand the ATA has solicited questions from all of you, from their colleagues across the province, and they've selected those questions which are representative of what's on your minds as teachers in the classrooms and as parents, and for all of you out there watching at home in your jammies and drinking your coffee. Not that I'm envious or anything. No, 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 no. 3 themes that we're going to be touching on today: education funding, education policy, and the teaching profession. We will have, I'll call on panelists to respond, and then for each question we'll have an open section as well too. And we want to encourage dialogue and discussion. That's what today is all about. The timing couldn't be better to discuss all these really important issues. So let's start off with our prepared statements, and I'm going to start with the NDP and David Eggen. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kim, and please let me just first acknowledge that we are here today on Treaty 6 land, as well as the Métis people of Alberta who share a deep connection to this land. And I just want to thank the Alberta Teachers Association for putting this forum on here this morning. As I look around, I see people that I've come to know over the last 4 years and have taught with. Even for some of you, I was, of course, a teacher with Edmonton Public School Board for 20 years. And so just to be coming full circle back here to this forum at this place is very meaningful to me. I would also like to thank everyone in the room here for helping us with all of the tremendous work that we have done in schools over these last 4 years. There was so much to do, and I believe really that we have accomplished more in terms of positive change, building schools, making sure we hire teachers and support staff to be in those schools, building curriculum, working to ensure that we have the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations fulfilled in our schools, building safe and caring schools as well. It's been a lot, and I couldn't have done it without the support and the professionalism and the intelligence of our teachers here in the province. We have one of the best education systems, I believe, in Canada and indeed in the world, and we owe a tremendous amount to the professionalism and the integrity of teachers and support staff that we have here across the province. So I'm looking forward to the panel here today, and I'm looking forward especially to your questions and constructive criticism. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Eggen. And I'll now call upon Stephen Mandel from the Alberta Party.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. It's nice to see so many people out on such a warm and sunny day. I met with someone earlier today that said it's minus 36 down in the Medicine Hat area, so we're lucky it's not quite that cold here. First of all, the Alberta Party believes that education is the great equalizer, and as a society we must do everything to ensure that all of our children have access to the highest standards. This will give them some of the most important tools to compete in a changing world. However, this will not come without a substantial financial commitment. And as I look at the coming years, I shudder at the challenge our educators and children face. As I compare it to my early years when I was in school, one of the big steps was you put your hand out and you got the strap. I don't know if anybody in this room can remember that, but it wasn't a fun time, but it was a different time. Today you face actually such greater monumental changes than we did, and so much is in front of you. However, my measure is my grandson. And so when I visit his school, I feel that he is in good hands with the teachers that do not just have the skills, but have the passion and care for their students. So any government must take the responsibility of teaching my grandson and all of our children very seriously. And I can assure you the Alberta Party will do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mandel, and I'll try to get over the image of getting the strap. I never got the strap when I was in school, and I spent a lot of time in the hallway, though, so.
I got it a lot, unfortunately.
Now,
it was easier to give in my days. You just get whack, whack.
Mark Smith from the United Conservative Party, please.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for inviting me here today. And as a teacher in the public school system for 30 years, I believe the experience has helped me to believe that it's absolutely critical that for the province to get the education piece of the puzzle right. In my years of teaching, I see just how complicated it is. You've got teacher training, curriculum, fostering a strong parent-student relationship, infrastructure, inclusion funding, transportation, small school funding, caring environments for our students, professional development, assessments, resources, teacher workload, salary, and the list goes on and on and on. Throw in some politics, throw in some different points of view, and the answers to the issues in education are not going to be easily answered. In Alberta today, all of these issues must be addressed in the light of the economy that is struggling, to say the very least. Can we solve the issues in education by simply raising more taxes? Should the province continue to borrow in order to pay for the present needs? Can you really create a prosperous society with a regime of high taxation and high debt? Is it time to have the tough conversations about how to look for efficiencies? How to ensure that government services across the board are delivered in such a manner as to be both world-class and efficient? Elections are always about vision, and so I'm excited to be able to share with you the United Conservative Party vision for moving forward on education, and to address just a few of the issues that you as teachers and we as Albertans are going to face as we move forward together in accomplishing the important task of educating our children.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I'll call now on David Kahn, the leader of the Alberta Liberal Party.
Thank you, Kim. I just want to acknowledge again that we are on Treaty 6 land as an Indigenous rights lawyer. I think that's really important first step in reconciliation, so I wanted to highlight that again. So education really is fundamental to moving our society forward, and for equality of opportunity, which is a core tenet for Alberta liberalism, is making sure that everyone has that equal opportunity to succeed in life, not to necessarily get to the same place, but to start off with a fair opportunity. And it's critical for future generations, for our society to move forward and prosper, that we have a strong education system, and we're supporting our children in the best way that we can. It really should be our #1 priority, on par with health care. Now, the previous Conservative governments did not properly fund our education system. Class sizes ballooned, infrastructure wasn't built, and I want to remind you all of that because, sometimes memories can be short, and we're 4 years out from the last Conservative government, but I want to remind you of that. There's been some positive change now. With the NDP, the K-4 curriculum updates have been encouraging, but at the same time, the NDP's last budget had only an increase of 1.8% for education funding, and that's far below the 3.5% in population growth plus inflation. So that's really been a cut to the education budgets. And what's really critical, one of the really critical areas, and we'll touch on that later, is class sizes. In 2003, the Alberta Commission of Learning said that there's class sizes were far too large and set out goals, and we haven't been able to reach those goals at all. I am pleased to see that there was further reform on GSAs and implementation of that. That was a signature Alberta Liberal initiative that was passed in the last legislature, Bill 10, which was really Laurie Blakeman's Bill 202, so I'm very happy to see that, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Khan. Now I'd like to call upon Mr. Jeff Rout from the Freedom and Conservative Party. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for having me here. It's a great pleasure. The importance of education and the teaching profession really cannot be overstated. It is greatly important for the future of our children, and we want to make sure that we maintain that. The Freedom Conservative Party is dedicated to getting our children an optimal education. We want all Albertan parents to have access to the very best education possible for their children. We are committed to an efficient, cost-effective, world-class education system in Alberta. We want a common-sense curriculum, including more of what Albertans are more likely to need as successful adults. A focus on literacy, numeracy, finance, vocational skills, voting and government functions will better prepare our children for the actual challenges they will face as adults. But the best curriculum doesn't help our children if we don't have an effective method to present it. We must give them the optimal learning sizes and the optimal learning environment. So the FCP wants to have optimally small size classes and other means that we can provide more attention and more one-on-one teaching. We want the funds that are already provided for our special needs students to go directly to the programs for those students and not go into the general revenue of a school. We want those dedicated funds to be dedicated to those special needs students. We want a full-day kindergarten to give our children a head start in education. We want to reform how we finance private schools versus public schools. We want to increase choice and access, but we also want to reduce or eliminate the public funding going to high tuition private schools. We will increase parent choice and access to the school of the parent's choice. To do this, we want to emulate the Swedish model and have more independent schools that don't charge a tuition. Firstly, the funding follows the child. The school you choose for your children will be the school that gets the funds. We will increase the funding that no tuition or low tuition independent schools receive to match that of the public system. After all, if funding tends to increase the education of children, we don't want these children to get a substandard education because they chose a different school. This will give more choice to Albertan parents and not just to those who have more funds available to finance that choice. However, we will claw back any public money going to schools based on the tuitions they charge. For every $2 a school charges in fees, their funding will be reduced by $1. So if a school charges $1,000 a year in tuition, their funding will be decreased by $500.
All right, Mr. Rout, thank you very much. Your time has lapsed. Thank you very much. Now we'll go to our first prepared question. And just so everybody is aware, the panelists have received this question in advance, so it comes as no surprise. We're going to hear from each panelist and then open it up to a bit of discussion. Then here's the question. Since 2011, student enrollment has grown by over 16%, and inflation has driven costs up by 10%. However, expenditures on instruction have only grown by 16%. This means that real per-student expenditure has fallen over 7 years by roughly 9%. As a result, we have larger classes and more students with under-supported special needs. The dire case of large and complex class sizes have been well documented recently by the Auditor General and media reports. How will you ensure that going forward, schools will have the funding they need to adequately support student learning and to reduce class sizes? The first respondent is from the Alberta Party, Stephen Mandel.
Thank you. Educating our youth gets to the core of the Alberta Party's vision. We have recognized the importance of education, our shadow budgets, which have allocated more funding for education than previous governments. Substantial funding has been allocated reducing class sizes. However, according to the Auditor General, it has not worked as funds have been reallocated for instruction. This should not happen. A strategy with adequate funding, proper controls, and reporting is essential to ensure class sizes reach the proper level. Alberta Party will continue to fund increasing student enrollment, both instructors and teachers' aides. Given the diversity in our classrooms, we want inclusion funding to be spent in the classrooms. Educators face complex issues today, more complex issues today than in the past. We will take action to ensure that additional funding for mental health supports and wraparound service we supplied to Alberta school boards. This funding will partially come from existing AHS funding. These will be fenced to ensure they are used to address classroom needs. We also recognize that there's different needs in both urban and rural communities. We must make sure that we have strategies for both. And I know my time is up. A minute goes very quickly.
Thank you very much.
You can't even breathe for a minute.
I'd like to hear now from Mark Smith, UCP.
Thank you very much. First of all, we have to understand that the NDP's reckless tax and borrow and spend policies have placed future governments in a very difficult position. They've put us on a track for a $95 billion debt by 2023. They've driven out an estimated $40 billion worth of projects that would have generated the jobs and the tax revenue necessary to fund vital education services. So we're going to have a conversation. We need to be able to have an education system that is going to be efficiently run. We're going to have to grow an economy to make sure that it can provide the revenue to pay for schools and teachers and aids and inclusion support. So the United Conservative Party is going to be willing to hold the line on the budget. We're going to maintain current funding. We're going to abolish the carbon tax. We're going to reduce red tape. And we're going to follow up on the Auditor General's report on small class size funding. And stay tuned, there will be additional announcements.
All right, thank you, Mr. Smith. Now we'd like to hear from David Kahn from the Liberal Party.
Yeah, thank you. Again, I want to stress that one of my #1 priorities in this next election is properly funding education, and I don't believe we should be balancing our budgets on the backs of our young people, on the backs of our future generations. That's no way to run a successful society. We want to hire more teachers, provide more support for special needs students, and true inclusive education. We want to see more mental health supports in schools. That's been a huge failing of our society, is not providing enough mental health supports for children and adults. We really want to commit to smaller class sizes. We're committed to introducing flexible but mandatory class size caps, especially for the crucial K to 3 and 6 grades. And we're committed to fully funding and tracking that class size reduction funding and program funding, something that hasn't occurred in years. We also want to better track funding that is supposed to be provided for coded students with special needs, to make sure that funding is really being provided to the students that need it, and making sure that our classrooms are truly inclusive.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kahn. And now Jeff Rout from the Freedom Conservative Party.
Thank you. The importance of small classes is quite large. There was a study in Tennessee, a multi-year study, which demonstrated that the smaller class size, going to 15 to 17 for K to 3, greatly increases performance. So we want to make sure that we can get that. Now, there's other ways that we can do it with efficiency, and that can be with teachers that are going from class to class with one-on-one time as well. So we want to make sure that we have a cost-effective system, because we've only got X amount of dollars for the budget. So another means for that, though, is also opening up the system towards private investors to put into school infrastructure. Because if we've got X amount of dollars, some of that is going towards capital cost and some of that is going towards operating cost. We want to keep on funding the operating cost, but allow more money from the private sphere to enter for the capital costs as well. That way, there's more teachers, there's fewer students per class, and more opportunities for all Albertans.
Thank you very much. And our next speaker is David Eggen from the NDP.
Well, thank you. And since we were elected in 2015, we made several choices, difficult choices, and one of them I think wasn't so difficult really, and that is to ensure that we continue to fund for enrollment in our schools over the last 4 budgets that I have built. And we know that during an economic downturn that wasn't easy to do, but we made compromises in other places to ensure that we were funding for enrollment every step of the way. As well, what we saw, I think probably from 2001, is that they stopped accounting or compelling the government compelling school boards to account for the class size initiative money. And I am taking all of the Auditor General's recommendations, including demanding that school boards give us an account of spending that class size money in the classroom. So we've just started that now. I expect to see positive results in the future.
All right, thank you very much, panelists. I'm now going to open it up to 5 minutes of general discussion. Anyone want to jump right in?
Well, sure. I mean, I think that
I was
the
going to
issue.
ask for someone, but go ahead. Now
You know,
I
we have 15,000 students, more students showing up in our classrooms every year. And this next fall, we will have the same thing. If you talk about freezing as the UCP, Jason Kenney said he'll freeze the budget. A freeze is a cut. That means that 650 teachers would not be hired for those students. And to make sure that their space is available, our government will be there to make sure that we fund for enrollment and that we make sure that the kids get the education that they need.
Mark
Also,
Smith, I
it's a-
think you want to say something about that, Mark Smith?
Yeah, thank you very much. You know, it's easy to make promises about spending money. And, you know, the United Conservative Party understands, and as a teacher, I understand the need for small class sizes. We understand the need for inclusion funding and for mental health funding. Philosophically, I don't think there's anybody at this table that has a problem with trying to meet the needs of students in those areas. But now you have to have the real conversation about how you're going to do that and where you're going to find the money for that. And what this NDP government has not been willing to do is to tell Albertans how they're going to eventually pay for this.
You can see exactly. You can see exactly what we're doing.
Excuse me, I didn't
Wait a second, I
All
don't
right,
think it's
I think
reasonable to
Mr.
expect
Mandel
that.
wants to get in
Yeah,
here.
I
Go
think
ahead.
this shouldn't just be a debate between frick and frack here. You know, there are other people that are here. I think
frick
it's,
and
I don't
respectful?
care. Either one of you can be frick, one can be frack. The reality is we are in financial challenges, but that doesn't change the fact that we have to have priorities. And you're going to have priorities, and then you have to make those tough decisions. Our priority is education. And so other areas might have to be have reductions because we need to be able to try to get our spending in order, not balanced budget, be careful you get killed by the microphone, not necessarily balanced budgets, but a way in which the priority is our children. If we don't want to invest in our kids, who the heck are we going to invest in? It is about building a tomorrow for our children, and that's what this is about. Without a tomorrow for my grandson, I'm not going to be here. So it's about making sure we have money in the bank for our kids so they have an education. Everything else is secondary.
You can see.
Jeff Rout, you had a comment. You were talking about more private investment in the school system. How do you envision that happening?
Well, by being able to allow public money going towards the students and following the students, there have been many situations. Sweden had a big problem of not having enough, the exact same problem we're talking about, not having enough teachers per student. So what they did is in 1982, they opened up the system for even for-profit schools, and they were going to give them the exact same amount that they gave to the public system. And that continues on till today.
Well,
and what it means is that investors, people who were living in Sweden, they wanted to invest in schools. They built schools with their own money. They built it with private funds, and that eliminated the capital costs required to get more teachers working. So now more of the budget can actually be put towards operating cost. And operating cost means salaries. Operating cost means more teachers per student. That's what the objective is. So look, the reality is we've only got X amount of dollars in our budget, and we can't just make it out of nowhere. We don't want to go deeper in debt. So how do we increase efficiency? And that's what the goal has to be. So we've got kind of a polemic issue going on here. We've got one side saying, you know, it's education all the way at all costs, no concern about money. We've got one saying we got to freeze education, we can't go any further. And both of those, there's a middle path here that's going to be better for that. And that middle path is efficiency, because you know, it is our children that are important too, but in addition to their education, we don't want them saddled with massive debt.
All right,
So,
thank you. And I think David Kahn wants to get in here.
I've got to jump in here. Alberta Liberals are committed to quality public education. That's it's similar to two-tier health care. Having a competing private system is, in my view, not the way to properly educate our children. And I want to reiterate that it's not right to be balancing budgets on the backs of our children. Our children, our future generations, are the means by which our society will thrive. The way that our economy will thrive is proper public education. So we can't be shortchanging education to balance the budget. And I also want to reiterate, as I mentioned before, that Minister Egan talks about properly funding enrollment, but A 1.8% increase in funding is a cut when there's 3.5% increase in population growth plus inflation. So let's talk about reality and not about platitudes here. We've got to properly fund our children's education, and we certainly have to
your time
find-
is up, Mr. Khan. We're going to go on to the next question. Thank you very much. We do have another funding question, so if you didn't get your full thought in, you could probably pick up where you left off and continue. The next question on education was submitted by a member of the audience. Now, first of all, the NDP will be allowed to respond, followed by the Liberal Party, and then it will be open to others. We have 5 minutes of total time for this discussion, and this question came from Ray, a grade 2 teacher in Grand Prairie. Here's the question. Teachers are continually told that there is not enough money for the important things that public schools need, like small classes, full-day kindergarten, or adequate supports for special needs. So, why should scarce public dollars be directed to exclusive private schools? Ray writes, like the Weber Academy in Calgary and others that have recently garnered media attention for questionable financial management strategies as opposed to inclusive and accessible public schools. To what extent does your party support the basic democratic principle of universal access to free, high-quality, publicly funded education? First response comes from David Eggen.
Well, thank you. And certainly you can judge our government based on our actions, and we have put money into public education every step of the way, and we will continue to do so. It's interesting to hear, at least there's one Conservative Party here that's not afraid to talk about what they're actually intending to do, which is have private American-style education here in the province of Alberta. And quite frankly, what we need to make sure we're doing is by investing in public education, people make choices around that. People choose the best education system here in the province of Alberta, and they choose overwhelmingly the public system because that is the one that has the highest standard, the standards that are set by the Alberta Teachers Association, and the investment from our government to ensure that everyone has the access to the very highest quality of education, regardless of how much money they have in their pocket.
And our next speaker is from the Freedom Conservative Party to respond to the question, and after that, it'll be open for 5 minutes.
You know, it's rather ironic. First of all, we're not copying American style, we're copying Swedish style. That's a very different statement there. But also, ironically, we are the only party that's saying we are going to stop funding high tuition private schools. No one else here brought that up. You didn't bring that up, the NDP. We're the only ones saying that because it is wrong that the average Albertan is subsidizing the education of a millionaire who, for a school that their children could never possibly attend because they don't have that much money. That isn't right. And I'm sure that grinds on average Albertan that they are funding that when they're working their hands to the bone trying to make ends meet. So no, we're going to end that. But we're also going to increase universal access, not decrease it, because we're going to give more choice. So if you've got, and this is a big thing, if you've got a community, let's imagine you want to make a Somalian school, and it was focused on Somali culture, focused on Somali language, right? You wanted to preserve that culture, you wanted to preserve your history and your heritage. This would actually allow that without any tuition. So we're increasing universal access. We're not decreasing it, we're increasing choice.
All right,
That's
thank
the
you.
point.
And panelists, now it's open for discussion for the next 5 minutes. Go at it.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here and reiterate again that we want a universal quality public education system in this province. We want to track the funding much more closely so that it gets to the front lines, you as teachers and educational assistants and people helping with inclusive education for special needs students. So we want to properly track that funding for inclusive education, track that funding for reducing class sizes, and have some transparency and accountability to where those funds are going and what they're being used for. Now, there are charter schools that have been developed for children with special needs that aren't getting proper education and care in the public system. We want to reverse that and provide that funding to the public system to properly fund those students. But in the meantime, there is room for specialized schools for children with special needs, and until we can properly integrate them into the public system, we have to consider that. Another thing is
and next speaker, we're going to jump
funding.
and allow other speakers to jump in. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you.
you.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay,
I'll be polite.
Okay, thank you very much. The United Conservative Party has a long history of supporting choice in education. We're going to support separate, francophone, charter, independent schools, home education. We believe that that's created a successful tradition of education in Alberta. Albertans don't want a one-size-fits-all. Choice is a foundational principle of our party, but we're going to be clear here. We're not going to be shifting money from the public system into a private system. We believe that the formula that we have presently is meeting Albertans' needs, and that it helps to fund all of the educational choices that our parents and our students desire in this province.
Okay.
Thank you. Just a comment. This isn't about either or. It's about making sure we properly fund the public education system. You know, if we make a decision that our children have the right to have a good education, have the kind of supports in the schools, that means allocation of money. Let's not confuse ourselves of making it either or. Let's build a great public education system. That's our priority. That's what should be our priority. And I want to make sure that the investment of the Alberta Party believes investing in public education is the only way we're going to create a great equal society for everyone. So thank you.
All right, and we're moving on to our next theme section, which is education policy. Once again, we're going to start with a prepared response, 1 minute from each panelist, and followed by a 5-minute open response time. Here's the question. The Government of Alberta has launched an extensive redesign of provincial curriculum across 6 subject areas at all grade levels. The K-4 draft curriculum was approved for field testing next year, and development has already started on grades 5 to 9 programs of study. What changes, if any, would your government make to the curriculum or curriculum renewal process? What priorities would you make to ensure that the process of development and implementation are successful going forward? Let's start off with a response from Mark Smith from the UCP.
Thank you very much. United Conservative Party believes that a curriculum rewrite is overdue. It's critical that when we do this, though, that we do it right. And we're not convinced that the curriculum, the K-4 draft curriculum, is as balanced as it needs to be. We see some problems in the areas of math and social studies that we believe need to be addressed. Providing a new curriculum in every discipline all in 1 year is going to put an incredible burden on K-4 teachers, and that's a concern for us. We share the ATA's concern about whether teachers will have enough time and enough support and resources and assessment pieces to be able to implement the curriculum successfully. So we're not going to be throwing out the whole curriculum, but we do want to ensure that the curriculum is necessary, it has the necessary knowledge and skills and core competencies, that it's balanced, that it provides for critical thinking, that it reflects diverse perspectives, that it has an appropriate level of public engagement, and that teachers have the support that they need to implement it successfully.
Thank you. Next speaker is David Kahn from the Liberal Party.
Yeah, the curriculum review is long overdue. We generally speaking are supportive of the curriculum renewal process. We see no reason to scrap it or the results it has produced thus far, unlike Mr. Smith's leader who says alternately he'll scrap it and then not scrap it. We don't want to engage in fiscally wasteful and unnecessary partisan interference. If an elected government, we would engage in consultations with you, educators, school boards, and parents to see if there's any major issues that we can address. In terms of process, one area that we would improve is the public awareness of the consultations. Controversy has arisen because there's an inaccurate perception that consultations were lacking, so we would want to engage in that. In terms of priorities, we want to see greater emphasis on computational thinking, Indigenous history, financial literacy, and age-appropriate early education on LGBTQ2S+ issues. And we do appreciate the work that has already begun to improve education in these areas.
Thank you very much. Jeff Rout from the Freedom Conservative Party.
We want to have a focus on the core elements that are going to be beneficial to students as they grow and as they live adult lives in Alberta. We want to focus on literacy, we want to focus on numeracy, finance, voting process, government. These are the things that they need in their everyday lives, and moreover, these are also things that are very easily measurable. So we want to have that core value, and every year these things should be tweaked every little bit, so we're going to be constantly monitoring it and make sure that we're being as effective as we possibly can for the benefit of our children.
Thank you. Next speaker, David Eggen from the NDP.
The curriculum rewrite here in the province of Alberta is historic, it's long overdue, and it has had very positive results. You can see the K-4 prototypes up now that will be field tested this year. What's not normal about this whole process is that the UCP, Jason Kenney, chose to use the curriculum as a political tool to score cheap political points. And it tells you two things about this whole process, ladies and gentlemen. Number one, that the UCP is willing to use education as a political tool in order to gain votes, even if their claims do not match reality. And number two, that Jason Kenney is willing to spread untruths. And, you know, when somebody's running for the highest office in the land and they're willing to try to deceive people for the sake of gaining political points, that tells you about somebody's character.
Thank you. Stephen Mandel, please, Alberta Party.
Thank you. The Alberta Party is supportive of the current curriculum review. The Alberta Party believes that we should have a continuous process of renewal in our curriculum redesign. Society and technology are continuously evolving. We need to ensure that our students have the knowledge and skills that they will require for the workplace in their lives. There are other areas that I believe we need to have more emphasis. One is an ongoing understanding of the impacts of technology on our students and our educators, both education and societally. It's going to make incredible change in our lives, and we all need to understand that. And others that our children and grandchildren are likely to face situations that demand creativity and adaptability. We have rightly put a lot of emphasis on the traditional course subject, but if we do it at the expense of arts and physical education, we're not providing students with a balanced environment they need in today's very stoic lives. What I have heard from educators, administrators, are concerned about the speed of the rollout of the current curriculum review. The Alberta Party will listen to, work with educators, ensure the rollout is done in an organized manner. Additional professional development is required, then let's take the time. There's nothing as important as getting this correct. If it takes more time, let's just do it.
Thank you, panelists. You now have 5 minutes to engage in discussion.
Okay, great. I think that go ahead.
From Mark Smith first. Go ahead.
I think that we need to get a little further ahead than the language and the rhetoric that the Minister of Education is using here. You know, I think I would agree with Mr. Mandel here that we've seen that we need a curriculum that is going to challenge our students. It needs to be rigorous. We need to make sure that it has the capacity to take our students through things like Alberta history and Canadian history. We need to make sure that we've had problems with the rolling of this curriculum, and then the teachers are absolutely correct when they say that there's some concerns about rolling it out and whether you're going to have the time and the resources to be able to do that. The United Conservative Party is just simply suggesting let's take a pause, let's take a breath, let's review what's happened, let's fix the problems that have obviously come to the forefront, and let's make sure we have a really good curriculum.
Any response from panelists to that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the curriculum process has been literally engaging hundreds of thousands of Albertans, and you can see the results in black and white on the website. If you have constructive criticism around what's there, I think that what teachers and parents and professionals have produced so far, then for sure we will make modifications as field testing progresses. But we don't need, though, is this idea that you can conflate the whole thing into some sort of political tool, right, to tell people about something about the curriculum that's just simply not there. I mean, that sort of thing is not helpful. What is helpful is the tremendous work that we've done to build a solid curriculum thus far, and I thank teachers and the general public for helping us every step of the way so far.
Whether it's to the person to the left or the right of me, the reality is we shouldn't play football with our children's education. The reality is the minister shouldn't interfere, which I don't believe David is, in the process of looking at the curriculum. It is a bunch of very intelligent, creative people that are doing it. We should respect that. But it shouldn't be stagnant. We should make sure we look at how it can change over time. I think that's vitally important. We shouldn't wait 6, 7, 8, 9 years until it changes, because society's changing so quickly today. We should have in the process a way in which we can create an ongoing review of what we're doing to make sure our students are up to date on some of the most creative technological things that they're going to face in the next number of decades.
And we shouldn't be politicizing the future of our students. You know, Mr. Kenny likes to engage in gaslighting. He talks about throwing out the curriculum review, then when he's challenged on it, he says, oh no, I never did it. He does the same thing in healthcare. He talks about how BC purportedly spends 20% less on healthcare than when we challenge him on it, him and his healthcare critic on it. He says, oh no, we're not saying that. I was merely making a comparison. That's really politicizing and really doing a disservice to Albertans to suggest and pretend that you're talking about something and then flip-flop and reverse and try to cover things up. We want real policy and real leadership and not that kind of politicization of our children's futures.
Is there anyone really here who isn't politicizing? I mean, there's a lot of throwing names and saying he's wrong and I'm right and so forth. So I think we should be honest and say that, you know what, this is a political discussion. We are dealing with politics and policy. So we are going to criticize each other's points. We are going to have our own ideas, and we're going to put them forth to the general public to review and make a decision on.
We should criticize policy, but we shouldn't be saying one thing and then reversing ourselves and saying another thing when we receive some pushback. We should be providing some real leadership and standing on our policies and properly communicating those policies to the public.
And that, if we're going to try to characterize what the United Conservative Party has suggested on curriculum, Mr. Kenny has said that if we find that this is an overly ideological curriculum, then we're going to make changes. We've already got principal experts that have refused to or have stopped working with working groups because they believe there are serious problems with this curriculum. Those are the people that we've been talking to, those are the people that we've listened to, and to suggest that those facts are not there.
The curriculum review is posted. I mean, why can't you make a principled position on it?
We have taken a principled position on it. We've said we want a curriculum that is rigorous, that challenges our students, that creates critical thinking, that is going to allow for different perspectives, that's going to look at Alberta.
Why did Mr.
Canadian
Kenny
history,
say that he was going to throw it out?
All of those things, because there have been
Shred
serious,
yeah.
There have been some serious problems given to us and Albertans by principal experts that are working on this curriculum.
What are
that's not real education. That's not
wait a
real
second.
leadership.
Hey, David, just wait a second. Mark, give me a couple of those things that he says are so damaging that we need to know. Just two.
One of those things.
Okay, and on that note, we're going to wrap up that question and go on to the next one.
Nice work, Kim.
This one isn't controversial at all. The next question on education policy comes from Lisa, a grade 2 teacher in Lacombe. And the Alberta Party will have the first chance to respond, followed by the NDP, and then open to others. Here's the question. In practice, our current form of inclusion is not working. We are burning out our teachers and support staff because people and classrooms are not adequately supported and equipped to meet the diverse needs of the students we have in every classroom throughout this province. In light of the recent government decision to ban seclusion rooms effective fall 2019, and given the comments made by Inclusion Alberta that such a ban should include hallways, empty classrooms, offices, and any other alternative locations that may be used to seclude students, I'm wondering, writes the teacher, what your government would do to ensure that additional personnel, support, and resources are put into classrooms to support the inclusion model the Government of Alberta is mandating we use. The response order, the Alberta Party is first.
Thank you. I don't think there's any more important question that we make sure that our classrooms are staffed with the right number of people, that teachers have the kind of support individuals within their classrooms, allows them to teach everybody and to have the necessary support for those children in the classroom that might need additional support. We need to make sure our classrooms are inclusive. We want to make sure that all kids know all kids, and I think it's really important that we do that. If we decide that we're going to put kids in seclusion, that's unacceptable. We should, as a society, we've grown, we should be able to find ways to do these in a much more effective way. Alberta Party would fund education in a way that will allow us to do the kind of things in our classrooms that would be respectful to all students and ensure that all students have the opportunity to learn, no matter their skill set or not. Let's make sure all Albertans feel comfortable in our educational system.
Thank you. David Eggen.
Well, thank you. And the way by which we can move to inclusion with supports in our classroom is to make sure that we are funding education properly and that we're directing those funds into the classroom to make sure that we hire teachers and support staff to ensure the safety and the good learning practices that need to happen in the classroom. We know that with 15,000 new students, say, showing up in the fall, we need to have at least 650 more teachers hired to meet that demand as well. We're looking for building the Classroom Improvement Fund. It was a good start, and to make sure that it's being directed to hire teachers in the classroom, and to make sure that we have a safe, inclusive environment for all students. Inclusion without supports is a challenge. I recognize that myself as a teacher, and we aim to continue with the direction of building those supports with the next government.
Thank you. Let's open this up to discussion.
We need to truly fund real, true inclusive education, and that means properly funding more teachers, more educational assistants, tracking that funding that's supposed to go towards supporting students that are coded with disabilities or learning challenges. And I want to challenge Mr. Egan on his so-called ban on seclusion rooms. Last week, we organized a rally on the steps of the legislature last fall to demand changes on this. He had a working group who came out with weak regulations, was then promising a ban. Then yesterday, he's declared a so-called ban that isn't a ban at all. It's not doing anything until September, and school boards can still apply to continue to use these rooms. I want to be clear that we want to support you and your goals and needs in the classroom so that you don't have to resort to using a seclusion room. It's a failure of true inclusive education to have to fail to fund true inclusive education that requires this kind of use of these draconian seclusion rooms. We've called
Thank
for
you, Mr. Khan. Anybody
ban.
else want to jump into this point?
Sure. I mean, go ahead, Mark. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. It's interesting. I just had a teacher friend of mine stop in my office yesterday who's a special needs teacher. Very concerned about how we're going to move forward on this issue of seclusion rooms. Nobody here is going to support, nor would she support, the unacceptable abuses that we've read about in the press. Every child in our school needs to be safe and well cared for. Her concern, though, was for the safety not only of teachers, but also for other students in the classroom. And so the ministerial order that I understand the Minister Egan has put forward is probably a meaningful stopgap measure. It probably tries to find that balance. I believe there's going to have to be a lot more discussion, a lot more proper consultation with the teachers that are in the classrooms that are having to deal with these issues. We're going to have to talk about training. We're going to have to talk about best practices. And because as much...
Thank you. If any other panelists want to jump in.
Just one comment, I guess. One of the most important things would be listen to the teachers who have to deal with that and what their suggestions are. I think they have much more knowledge than even the 5 people up here have. So hopefully they can
when something's wrong, when something's wrong, it's wrong, and we got to properly fund true inclusive education.
Jeff Rout, you wanted to get him.
So, I think the best way to ease the burden on teachers is to give them a class size that's appropriate to the task. So how do we do that? We've got an X amount of budget. We've got a limited budget. We've got to help pay down debt. So the best way to do it is to get more money. This is really a money problem, and that's ultimately what we're debating here. So how do we get more money? Let's get it from all over the world. Let's get it from people in Sweden. Let's get it from people in Europe. Let's get it from people in America. Let's get it from people in China. Let's get that money here for investment to build the capital costs, knock out a big portion of that capital cost, because I'm not saying we eliminate the capital costs of the public sphere either, of course, but we want to increase the amount of expenditures in Alberta.
Okay, David Egan, quick last word.
Well, it's very important that from this point, the ministerial order that I put in yesterday, to make sure that teachers and support staff and all students are safe in the classroom. And how do you do that? You need to make sure that you resource that thing. And we will make sure that through training and resources that we will move past to build a more progressive model for dealing with students with severe special needs.
Thank you very much. The next section has to do with the teaching profession. Money again. A lot of questions come back to funding, doesn't it? Here's the question, and once again, I'll call on the order and we'll have an open discussion. Each panelist will have a prepared statement, a 1-minute response. What changes, if any, would your government make to the membership or functions of the Alberta Teachers Association? We'll hear first from David Kahn, and you have 1 minute.
At this time,
I'm sorry, excuse me. It was, yes, go ahead. My apologies.
At this time, we have no plans to change any of the membership or functions of the Alberta Teachers Association. I think you guys do a great job making sure that your regulatory, union, and advocacy functions are distinct and separate, and a very, very professional way of running your organization and your profession. So I'm very proud to be here, and I think that the ATA does a very good job of regulating and ensuring your profession is properly run. So I don't have any criticisms of how things have been going.
You can hold your applause. Jeff Rout, please.
Yeah, well, that's actually, you know, the ATA is an independent body, and it should remain independent, and it should be able to operate as it has been for the benefit of the teachers and under some control of the teachers as well. So the dual function it's a great idea, and I don't think there should be too much government meddling in it.
We're making up time on this question.
Yeah.
David Eggen.
Well, thanks. The Alberta Teachers Association has helped to create a standard of education and professionalism and integrity for not just teachers, but the entire education system, and I couldn't be more proud. Together, we've had close partnerships in regards to building professional standards for teachers, for administrators, and superintendents. We've worked on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission recommendations. I saw the plaque outside. We're working on curriculum together. The partnerships that we have built with the government, this government of Alberta, has really moved education forward. We've moved more progressive and positive change in the last 4 years than we saw in the previous 30. So thanks, ATA, and I continue to work with you in the future.
Alberta Party, please.
Wouldn't it be shocking if someone started to criticize, eh? I think all of us, and including myself, that would be a bit of a faux pas. Anyway, but that's not fair. The reality is you do a great job, and associations have a long tradition in this province of managing their own affairs, and I think that you do a remarkable job in doing it, and I hope that you continue doing it and ensure that the oversight function that you have, you always maintain a proper distance in that between the two different functions. And again, as long as my grandson's properly educated and he's happy, I'm happy. So. Keep up the great work.
Thank you. UCP, please.
Okay, here we go. Are you ready? Okay. As a 30-year teacher, obviously, I was a part of the ATA, and I truly do understand the value of the ATA. I've served on local council. I've attended the annual representative assemblies. You know, I have been in the chairs that you are sitting in right now. So I believe I can say that I understand the value of the ATA, and I believe that the United Conservative Party understands the important role that the ATA plays in the education of our children. The United Conservative Party clearly has stated that we support the right for teachers to bargain collectively, that we support your right to be a part of a professional association. But just like the ATA, we have an AGM, and we are driven by member-driven policy. Just as you meet at the ARA and you pass member-driven policy, so does our party pass member-driven policy at our AGMs. But our members have consistently told us that their highest priority is fixing the economy of Alberta. If we don't get the economy going and moving properly, we will not have the capacity to pay for all of the things that we want to do in education. So splitting the ATA into you know, two separate functions is not going to be in our platform. It's not something that we're going to place a priority on as a government. There are a lot of higher priorities that our people have identified that they want us to work on, and so we look forward and we are committed to working with the ATA from day one in a constructive way to solve the problems in education.
All right, now I'll open it up. Is there any discussion, or are we all on the same page?
We can all sing Kumbaya.
Yep.
That's it? Does anyone want to? So I do have a question, though, for Mark Smith. I'm wondering, is this a change in policy? You've said that it's not a priority to chop up the ATA, but you acknowledge it was raised at your AGM, so...
It was raised by our AGM, and we take member-driven policy very seriously, okay? Like all democratic...
Is that the grassroots guarantee?
Like all democratic organizations, We could talk about your position on grassroots a little later, maybe, if they ask. But the reality is this. Every party has priorities. Every party places an emphasis on the right syllable. And as we go forward, we're going to be making sure that we work positively with the ATA and that together we can address the issues that need to be addressed in education, because that's what's best for our students.
All right, we'll move on to the next question then. This question is from Elizabeth, a language arts resource teacher from High Level. Her question is, it's about attracting and retaining teachers, particularly in the far northern parts of Alberta. She writes, teachers have had 5 years of 0% increases. In the past 6 years, across the province, our salaries have not kept up with the cost of living, and costs in northern Alberta are much higher. For many years, she writes, she's noted an average difference of approximately 20 cents per liter of gasoline, as well as disparity in prices of groceries and most other goods. She writes, Alberta health employees and other professionals in our communities have been receiving a northern living allowance for several years. Teachers in Fort McMurray, which is not as far north as we are, also have long received a northern allowance. But this same allowance is not available for teachers in northwestern Alberta. She has 2 questions. When can teachers expect that salaries might begin to reflect increases in cost of living? And what should be done to ensure that northern teachers are treated fairly given their added cost of living? The first response will come from the UCP.
Thank you. You know, maybe I'm unique in this panel here in that I took 0, 0, 0, and then we went into politics and never got the 2. Okay, I think I understand what it's like to be a single income teacher, to know that there's sometimes more month than salary at the end of the month. And I think I know, and I've had the conversations for 30 years, what it means to try and figure out what a professional salary really looks like. So I want to encourage you in that the United Conservative Party, we've said we understand that you have and should have and deserve to have the right to bargain collectively through the ATA. We understand that teachers have only had a 2% raise in the last 6 years and that you've lost ground to inflation. We understand that there will be negotiations going forward. They're going to be challenging, especially with the economy that we find ourselves in and what I would argue would be the mismanagement of that economy by the NDP. But we're committed. We're committed to ensuring that teachers have a fair deal, that the government is going to do its best in the challenging times to ensure that in that negotiation process that teachers are respected and have a fair deal. Now, having said that, it is going to be challenging.
Right, thank you. From the Alberta Party, please.
Thank you. That's a great question. I've had an opportunity to travel around the province and listen to people in various parts of the province, and oftentimes rural Albertans are very frustrated in that they have challenges meeting the requirements of their children, their schools, and so I have great empathy for the individual from High Level and the challenge they face. But we do face great financial problems in the province right now. That's a negotiation tool, and I would hope that an Alberta Party government would be able to sit down with the ATA and come up with a proper negotiations that would allow teachers both in rural and urban, north and south, to have the kind of life they need to have in order to raise their families in a way that's effective for them. So this is about negotiations and coming up with a better solution.
Thank you. I'll open this up to discussion now. Anyone want to jump in on this topic?
Well, you know, when you look at, there's collective bargaining, and then there's collective bargaining in good faith. And certainly what we have done over these last number of years has, you know, we've changed the collective bargaining process. We have that provincial table now, and it's been, some things have been challenging, but at least we are there in good faith to make sure that people will, you know, get a fair deal that they can sign on to. As a teacher here for 20 years, and then as in opposition, I saw Conservative governments not bargaining in good faith. And you have to listen carefully with the UCP rhetoric. They talk about one thing on one hand, and then they talk about something else on the other side of their mouth. You know, it reminds me of that snake in the Jungle Book, right? Says, you know, trust me, and it's also great, but then, you know, that can come back to bite you.
Well, you call us rats and snakes, don't you?
I can't imagine someone doesn't want to respond to that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry?
Go ahead.
Oh, sure. Well, I won't respond directly any more than what I just did to the minister, but I want to talk about this. If we want to free up money, and that's exactly what this question is, imagine this. We've got X amount of budget that we have to spend on capital investment going towards building new schools. What if we could have that budget because we were able to get some private investors that did the exact same thing? They put that money in, the schools got built, the same amount of money per child goes to the school as we spend right now, and goes to teachers. It goes to teachers working there. And then, now we've got a whole bunch of money that we can actually spend on either reducing the debt or increasing the ability for teachers to have the funding that they're talking about right now. What you're talking about, what you need to do, is free up capital, and that's the way to do it.
Well, I've just got to jump in here and just remind everyone that Mr. Roud hasn't mentioned that these private investors are going to require high rates of guaranteed return to be investing in the public education system versus what the government can borrow and spend in infrastructure. So that's an important detail. I want to thank Elizabeth for that question. I traveled up to high level in Vermilion last year, and it's just amazing how large this province is and how different the regions are. And similar to how expensive it is to live in the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, it's a gradation, so it's very expensive to live up there too. And I'm impressed by the comparison with the Northern Living Allowance for health professionals, and so we would be open to considering examining those regional differences, because Alberta is such a huge place that we can't really have a one-size-fits-all policy necessarily for every region. So I really do take your question to heart, Elizabeth, and do realize how immense this province is and how different costs can be borne in different areas.
May I respond to Mr. Khan's statement?
Okay, briefly, and then we're moving on
Briefly.
to our final section.
No, we don't need to guarantee anything in the private sector. This is almost exactly how medical doctors work right now. They've got private offices, and they get paid based on how it's being used. They get paid by the government whenever a patient is coming there. We don't guarantee that we're going to pay for their operation or their capital cost of starting up operation, but we do finance it. So the same thing would be here. No, we don't have to guarantee the capital cost or the expenditure of building a school at all. That's not part of the program.
All right, thank you very much. We'll
simplistic.
move on to our final section. And these questions were drawn from audience members that are gathered here today. And they're more of a general nature, but some of them do have education themes, such as this one. Then we have some other questions. And this first question comes from Natalie, who teaches in an alternative education program in Picture Butte. The question is, many teachers are concerned that elements of their professional responsibilities are becoming more and more politicized. Do you see any negative consequences as a result of of being more political, or politicalization, sorry, I have a hard time saying that one, of education in Alberta's future? The first response from the Freedom Conservative Party, please.
Sure. Well, I do object to any kind of government interference telling you what kind of political beliefs you have to pass on to children. But we want to increase freedom and increase choice. So let's imagine that you want to start a school that had very liberal beliefs and you wanted to promote those liberal beliefs on school. More power to you. We'll fund it. If you want to have one that has conservative beliefs, that's that way too. But for public schools, well, we want to get out of the idea that the government's controlling what's being happening in philosophy in the education system.
All right, now we open this up to our panelists. Is there a political leaning in our classrooms?
Well, what's, I think, very important when we're talking about curriculum, the aspect of this curriculum that I think is not perhaps spoken of always, but should be, is that it is a skills-based curriculum, and we are leaving it up to the professional integrity of teachers to work with what's best for them in their classroom for their kids. And so by deferring to the professional integrity and the training of teachers every step of the way, I believe that we win and build a stronger education system. As a teacher myself, anytime I was given that latitude to make sure that my judgment and my trust in, let's say, assessment and so forth was honored and respected, then that stepped up my individual teaching game. And I think collectively, by deferring to the professionalism of teachers, we will step up the collective level of education here in the province of Alberta.
I think that I would like to piggyback on that, in just that, as a 30-year teacher and having been with teachers most of my life, I've really been impressed with the professionalism of the teachers within the classroom. And I think that it's important that you have the freedom to be able to choose the pedagogy of your choice. When I taught with teachers, you know, I would have some teachers that would teach in a completely different manner than I would, yet they were excellent, excellent teachers, and they met the needs of their students. And I would have kids that would come into my classroom and say, "Oh, Mr. Smith, I'm so glad I got you for my teacher. I really like the way you handle your classroom." So I think teachers have to have that profession. We put huge resources into making sure that you're professional. You have to be able to use that professional judgment, whether it's in pedagogy or whether it's in assessment.
Right. Stephen Mandel, you wanted to...
I think it goes back to the ATA. Teachers are overseen by the ATA and their roles and the way they conduct their classrooms, and then through the principals. And so I would hope that there wouldn't be apolitical, as one might determine from the political world, interference in the schoolrooms and the classrooms. It's vitally important that you're independent, you're allowed to teach in a way that the children receive the kind of education on a neutral basis, not on a political basis. You're there to teach, not to politicize the classroom, which I don't believe teachers do, unless there's a discussion in the classroom during an election period, which they have all the time, so, which is good. Nothing wrong with talking about elections, but not necessarily doing anything different.
I think the vast majority of Albertans and teachers are fair and balanced and moderate in their views, and we can expect a level of professionalism from them. And also, if the curriculum review is open and transparent and hears from all stakeholders and is very careful in developing curriculum, then we can have a fair and balanced curriculum that is not politicized. Also, I engaged in a debate at my old alma mater, William Averett High School in Calgary, and I was very impressed because they wanted us to engage with the students but didn't want us to campaign or politicize the issues at that forum. So I thought that was a very good leadership by the CBE in that case to ensure that we were there to get children and students involved in thinking about governance in Alberta, but to not politicize the issue in school curriculum or on school property. So I really appreciated that opportunity.
All right, thank you. We'll move on to our next question. It comes from Craig, who teaches high school social studies in Lethbridge, and here's the question. Using a 10-point scale, this of course comes from a teacher, with 1 being not serious and 10 being crisis, how would you characterize the issue of climate change? Furthermore, how would your party navigate the space between using Alberta's fossil fuel resources and transitioning to a more sustainable, clean energy system? Our first response will come from the Alberta Liberal Party.
Yeah, thanks for that great question, Craig. I think, I don't know if it's easy to put on a scale of 1 to 10, but I think the climate, global warming is a crisis and an existential threat that we all have to address. We all have to work together to address it in Calgary and Edmonton and Alberta, across the country and around the world, because it's a problem that we all have to address. We would implement a revenue-neutral carbon tax. Every economist worth their salt says that that's the most efficient way and the most market-friendly way of ensuring that carbon emissions come down. But we would make sure it's revenue-neutral because, unlike the NDP, if it's not a revenue-neutral carbon tax, it completely undermines the market mechanisms that it's designed to influence. So we're really concerned with climate, and we'll have a strong climate plan, but we want to make sure that it operates in the most efficient way possible and actually gets those results. Another thing I'll just mention quickly is we've been demanding transparency on the reduction of carbon emissions, and this NDP government has refused to be transparent on actually how it's working, and we are very big and demand transparency in all sectors, be them education or environmental policy, and so we want to see more information from the government, and when we form government, we'll be much more transparent with Albertans about how things are going and how our goals are going to be met. There's going to be a long transition.
All right, thank you. We're going to open
energy.
this up to open discussion now. Everybody agree on climate change?
Well, we know that how important it is. Yes, climate change is real, and anybody who is choosing to peddle something otherwise, either in public or in private, is undermining a very important part of how we not only fight climate change here in the province of Alberta, but we work to diversify our economy so that we are building more value-added products here in the province and ensuring that we have a sustainable future for our kids and our grandchildren as well. So, you know, climate change is part of the curriculum. You can have different views there in the curriculum around these things, but you cannot have just climate change denial. I've seen the UCP posting things about, you know, teachers teaching about climate change and using fear as a tactic to try to suppress people from actually talking about these things in an honest and open manner.
Okay.
Climate change is real. I think it's important to understand that our energy industry is also very important to the province. We need to work with them to make them more efficient, to create opportunities so that we can sustain it in the future. It is a big part of our economy. We can all say that we want to eliminate the use of hydrocarbons, but it's not going to happen in the next little while, so let's do the best we can what we have and realize that we can use new forms of energy in order to make our system more efficient, more effective. And I think give NDP some credit. They have done a good job in trying to produce additional investment into new sources of energy. So if we all work together, we can find a better way to do things, but let's not forget our energy industry. It is vitally important to the future of Alberta.
Mark Smith, anything from you?
Absolutely. I wish we could talk about this for a lot longer than we're going to have the chance to. Is climate change real? Absolutely. What should we do? Well, I don't believe that a carbon tax has the capacity. It's not. It's all pain, no gain. It has not reduced the carbon consumption in this province at all. And the experts tell us that it would have to be at about $300 to be able to do that. How do we try to deal with this real issue? Well, I believe that it's through technology. If you have were willing to come into my constituency, you'd find out that one of the things that's going to happen sometime in the next year, Lord willing, is we're going to have the first commercial deep well geothermal electrical production facility in Canada and North America. It will. It has the capacity to meet our 30% greenhouse renewable targets. They figure that there are 20,000 abandoned and orphaned wells that we can repurpose for doing this.
Okay, we're going to have to wrap that up and go on to our next speaker, Jeff Rout.
You know, I rather try to go away from any kind of alarmism. I don't think that's necessarily a good means to have a rational discussion or to have a rational decision-making. Some people believe in climate change and some people don't. I'm quite convinced that humans affect their environment. But I don't think it's the role of the government to tell you what to think and what to believe. I think you should be able to believe whatever you want. But those people who believe in climate change, those people who don't, one thing that they probably all have together is that we should have good, effective, and good laws and legislation on clean soil, air, and water. And the good news is if we have that kind of policy, the people who believe in climate change, it will have exactly the needs that they want, and the people who don't would as well. So rather than being divisive and putting people into different camps on this, why don't we work on something where we can all agree and work towards the same common goal?
The role of government is to provide leadership on critical issues, not to pretend that there's two sides to every story, and we need to have an actual plan, and I haven't heard an actual plan from any of the conservative parties at this table, and it's really concerning for our children and grandchildren.
There are two camps of thought on it in the voting public.
There are two camps of thought
Sir,
on it.
in the voting public, there definitely is.
Folks,
this is a controversial topic.
And but I do, before we move on to our next topic,
it wouldn't be controversial.
Panelists, before we move on, Jeff Rout, I just want to get clarification from you to the question. Sure. The question was asking on a 10-point scale, is it not serious or is it a crisis, climate change?
I avoid crisis at all points. So that's not really a good means of speaking. So I'm going to object to that. Moreover, though, I'm not the only person who didn't give a number, so I'm not going to answer it that way.
Do you want to go down the line? Do you want to hear from the line? Okay, let's do that. Okay, let's do that. We'll start off with David Eggen on a score of, from 1 to 10, with 1 not being serious and 10 being a crisis. What would you, where would you put climate change?
11.
Okay, Stephen Mandel.
That's avoiding the question. I'd say 8.
Okay, Mark Smith.
Okay, I'll stay in the center. The Liberal or the Alberta Party always says they want to be, in the center. 8.
10.
All right. So what we do to our environment has a massive impact. So in that subject, I'm going to say 7.
There you go.
All right, thank you very
There we
much.
go.
Thanks for playing
For what
along,
it's
guys.
worth.
So if it's that
All right.
important, where's the plan?
All right, the next question comes from Brandon, who teaches junior high humanities in Calgary. The question, many schools are over capacity and have children learning phys ed in gathering spaces, core classes in staff rooms and congested learning environments, classrooms, lockers, hallways, offices, libraries, etc. What would you do to improve this situation? The first response from David Egan, please.
Well, thank you. And from 2015, our government realized that there was a huge infrastructure deficit in schools. The previous government was not building the infrastructure we needed. We have the youngest population in Canada and the fastest growing enrollments. And so we've been building schools as fast as we can. To date, we have 244 school projects on the go here or completed in the province of Alberta. It's the biggest infrastructure build in the history of the province, and those schools are full as soon as we build them. We know that we will need those next round of schools as well, because of course we built a lot of those schools. Those are elementary schools and junior high, so guess what happens next, right? And so we are committed to making sure that we have teachers in those schools, that we have support staff, that we have excellent curriculum in those schools, but we need to build them for the sake of our kids, for the sake of building a strong society.
All right, thank you. And panelists, I open it up to discussion. What would you do to improve the overcrowding situation in the whole schools?
Well, I would go back to the exact same statement. We need to get more money. We need more money, and the way to do that is to get private investors into it as well. Because if we do that, then we don't increase taxes, we don't increase debt, and we do build the infrastructure.
Those P3 schools that were an absolute failure, right, across the province, I'm having to deal with them all the time. They're a huge problem. They're public institutions. We build them publicly, cheaper, better, and we have control over the buildings.
Well, we can moderate that with legislation.
Whoa. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I've already spoken. I'll yield.
I think one of the things we can do is maybe a bit more efficiently is give some of the money to the school boards to build the schools. I think they might be a little more efficient than the provincial government. And so I think that's one way to maybe more quickly move things.
Oops. I just want to jump in and say that Alberta Liberals, we believe in the power of the markets. We believe in letting markets work as efficiently as possible. But where there's where there's a need to create shared public infrastructure, we believe that government construction and government funding of that shared public infrastructure is an important role for government. So we don't believe in failed P3 projects and diverting public money to fatten private profits with guaranteed rates of return. I think when we're talking about highways, hospitals, schools, the government can borrow at a low rate and has a role to play in properly building our shared public infrastructure.
You know, I think we have to have a conversation here that's at least honest. We've got an economy that is slated to be growing at something I think the paper said yesterday at 1.3%. It's going to be the slowest growing economy in the country. We have been racking up debt. I believe when I looked at the Alberta website the other day, in the last 2 months we've borrowed $9 billion. We have, and we can only fund the services that we all want to fund when we have the economy that has the capacity to do so. And so at the heart of this conversation, we're going to have to make sure that we are growing our economy. That means that we have to have a tax regime that is capable of doing that. We have to look for efficiencies where we can find them. And so it's going to be, and it's not going to be an easy conversation. So we've made the commitment as the United Conservative Party to maintain funding. We believe we can grow the economy at a 3% rate. That will eventually balance the budget. And we haven't heard any kind of a conversation from any of the parties about their plan for trying to balance the budget.
Wait a minute. You've just said something that isn't true, because you've said you're going to do it, but what are you going to do it? I can say the sky is falling, and what's the difference? The fact is, you say you're going to balance the budget, you're going to grow the economy by 3%. That's big. I'm not saying you can't do it, but how are you going to do it?
Well, you know, fair call. And as we roll out our platform, there will be more details. But we have said...
Hang on, folks. Let him finish.
We have said that we're going to have to look at the tax regime in this province. We're going to have to look at the spending in this province by government. We're going to have to look at efficiencies in the bureaucracy of the government. We're going to have to go back to school boards and ask for them to look for efficiencies in their budgets. We're going to have to look for better ways of doing things, looking for efficiencies and cooperation between school boards. All of these things are going to be on the table. But I don't think that it's productive to be able to just say, well, yeah, we want to fund, we want to fund, we want to fund. That's easy to say, and I agree. We all want to fund. We don't have a philosophical problem with wanting to fund education, small class sizes, inclusion. All of those things are good things that we all can understand that are going to meet the needs of our students, and we all want to meet the needs of our students. But there does
I knew there was a but coming.
There does have to be some conversation, some part of this conversation has to go back to how are we going to pay for it.
All right, thank you, and we'll move on to our final question. And this question comes from Shelley, who is a school principal from Edmonton. And she writes, as we look for the best use of money in education, I can't help but think that we are wasting a lot of money on excessive testing, such as PISA, TIMSS, PATS, Fountas, and Pinnell. No, it's not a law firm, these are tests. Given this, what is your vision for the appropriate use of standardized testing in schools? The first response will come from Mark Smith of the UCP.
Okay, well, as somebody that has been involved in standardized testing for all of his teaching career, I was involved with the Social Studies 30 diploma exams. I helped to make questions, I helped to mark, I was thoroughly involved in it. I support standardized testing. I always thought that it was a benefit to myself as a teacher and a benefit to my students. Maybe I was blessed, but I always had principals and administrators and school boards that understood that this was a tool that needed to be used properly and wisely to help my professional capacity, not just to make me scared. So I believe that we found a really good balance in this province with regard to standardized testing, and it is a tool that I believe many teachers across this province use for the benefit of their students.
All right, thank you. Let's open this up to discussion. Standardized tests, all good all the time?
Well, once again, because we're building new curriculum, certainly with a new curriculum, you cannot just use the old assessment, right? The two have to be modernized together, and certainly we are looking at ways by which we can provide public assurance, which is a fundamental part of this job for the government, to provide assurance that students are learning the skills that they need at each level along the way, and we're tracking those very carefully, and that's part of the new curriculum too, and that we have a public assurance model that is in keeping with the new curriculum. So certainly we're open to working for ways by which we can change the assurance model and to make it better. And I know as a teacher that, again, teaching diploma exams and so forth, it can be very reductive, right? Because you are not just assessing the kids on those diploma exams, but you're assessing, the teacher gets assessed too, right? And so, there's ways by which we can perhaps break that open a bit and assure that the public, that kids are getting the skills that they need, but also retaining the professional integrity of teachers and the true learning of our students in the classroom.
So obviously, some form of measurement's important, but that should be a determination of cooperation with the government, the Alberta Education, the ATA. I'm not a teacher, so I don't know, but as a parent and a grandparent, I would like to know how my grandson and my children are doing. So some form of measurement, but if you're trying to beat a fly with a bat, that doesn't make any sense either. So find a balance, and obviously leave it up to the system, try to find that. That shouldn't be something we should interfere with.
Yeah, I was here last night talking with teachers, and teachers were joking with me about the former PC education minister that brought in all the standardized testing, apparently joking that he didn't realize it would grow to be such a behemoth or grow to be so large or such an octopus. I think we need a fair and balanced regime. Some kind of testing and ensuring that goals are being met and students are achieving a certain basic levels of achievement at each level is important. I think perhaps the testing at the lower grades has become excessive, when we got to focus on the students and not how well they can write standardized tests. But I'm not an expert either. I'm not a teacher, so I'd really want to hear from you and your membership as to what you think the problems are with standardized testing and how we can improve it.
Jeff?
Thank you. I think the best thing to do would be to streamline the process and increase the efficiency of it by reducing it to mainly literacy and numeracy. And those two subjects are going to be the main core that we want to make sure that all students are standardized with. As to the rest of the curriculum, you should test it as you see fit. And parents will still get the information on your report cards. So streamline the standardized tests, literacy and numeracy. Everything else, teachers should do at their own discretion.
All right, that essentially brings to an end our formal question period, so to speak. But before we go, we're going to give each panelist the opportunity to deliver a 2-minute statement to wrap things up for us. We've certainly heard a lot of different opinions here today and some really good discussion. Our first statement will come from the Freedom Conservative Party.
Well, thank you very much again. It was a real pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for listening to the ideas, and I'm very interested in your ideas as well. Definitely, we want to increase the parent choice that we have. We want to increase the funds that are able to go into school system by also opening up the ability for private investors to fund capital operations and capital expenses. And other than that, we want to streamline the system to be easier on the teachers. We want to have fewer students per class, and we have a way to do it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Next, from the Alberta Liberal Party.
Yeah, thank you very much for having us here. I really appreciate the opportunity to engage with you teachers, which are on the front lines of the most important thing that we can do in society to make sure that we all succeed in life. So I'm really happy to be here. We don't have all the answers. I want to hear from you. I was talking with teachers last night about how they want to engage more, and there needs to be more engagement with public officials like us so that we can hear from you and what you guys need and want. We want to empower you to do the best job you can so that the best outcomes are achieved for our children and grandchildren. And so we really want to empower the front lines, to hire more teachers, more educational assistants, and really fully fund inclusive education and make sure that no child is left behind, no child is segregated in a locked room, that children with autism are properly, their needs are properly funded and they're integrated into the school system. Inclusive education is the way to go, and we really have to make a real concerted effort to focus on that and make sure that all of our children can succeed. And I again reiterate that you teachers are at the front lines, and we want to be your partners and ensure that you have the tools to succeed, and that means proper funding for smaller class sizes, for educational assistance, for individual educational plans, and proper quality infrastructure. So again, I really want to thank you all for being here and for inviting us to be here, and I'll be happy to talk with as many of you as want to talk with me afterwards, and I'm freely available anytime to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you. From the UCP, please.
Well, I want to thank you for having me here today. Never when I was an 18, 19-year-old kid stumbling into education did I think that I would be sitting in front of a group of peers doing this. But after 30 years of being a teacher, I continue to marvel at the skill set that you bring every day into the classroom. You must think of what you guys do. You have to understand pedagogy, assessment. You need to understand the psychology of the student. You need to be a mom and dad sometimes. You need to be a mentor, a disciplinarian, a communicator, a comedian, a mediator. You need to be disciplined. You need to be organized. You need to be as wise as Solomon sometimes. And you've always had to do your job within a budget that was set before you. And sometimes you did it all even when your parents and your students and even perhaps your administration weren't always as supportive as you thought they should be. It's an amazing job that you do, and I want to thank you for doing it every day. You came in early sometimes to class. You've stayed late. You've volunteered for basketball or for volleyball or for the ATA. And I don't believe that you did it for money. I bet it was for the kids. I bet it was for the kids. And I bet you see teaching as more than just curriculum or assessment or funding. I bet you see it's about the kids. So today, we've talked a lot about the future of education. about how we can fund and how we can deliver education. And most importantly, I believe that we have talked about how can we best equip our students and our kids for the 21st century. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And Stephen Mandel, the Alberta Party.
Thank you. First of all, I appreciate the invite to be here today and how this was a very friendly group of people up here, and thank all of you for bearing the wonderfully cold weather that is outside. But the reality is Alberta is facing some great financial challenges with budgets and meeting all of our commitments. But what is the priority? The priority has to be our children. And you know, up here over the day, we've had some individuals say how they've been teachers. I've never taught, but I have coached. I coached high school basketball for a number of years, and I got to, yeah, we won the provincial championship, but that's okay.
Who knew?
When I coached. When I left,
plug.
they lost. But the fact is, I got to meet the teachers and got to meet so many of the students, and I can tell you it's a great group of people, passionate about this was high school, passionate about their students, care a great deal about every part of their lives. And you know something, that's pretty special quality. You know, when I go visit my grandson at school and I have an opportunity to speak to his teacher, you know, the love and concern that teachers have for their students is pretty special. So I want to thank you for that. I want to thank you for the passion, the care and concern you have. And hopefully, Alberta Party government, if we get elected, we'll make sure we deliver on our promises to make sure you have the kind of funding and support you need to deliver the passion and love you have for your children and your job. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final statement comes from the NDP and David Eggen.
Well, thank you, and I certainly appreciate this forum here this morning, and it was quite interesting. I actually learned a lot, and I think all of you probably did too. Clearly, I learned that, once again, Alberta does face a very clear choice in this next election. We have made sure that we made sacrifices in other areas to ensure that we are funding for education here in the province for now and for the future as well. I don't think that anyone would compromise the education of a student, a 7-year-old who needs to read. And over these last 4 years, we have made sure we have made that investment. So now that child who is in grade 6 or in grade 7, they've had a high quality of education regardless of an economic downturn. You don't make cuts on the backs of kids, and you make sure that you are investing for the long game as well. The UCP likes to talk about, you know, path to balance and all this kind of thing, right? We have, as a government, a path to balance as well, but part of that path is to invest in schools, to invest in teachers, to make sure we're putting that money into the schools and to our classrooms every single day. You can judge me on my actions, and the intention that we have had over these past years is a direction towards reducing class sizes, to have inclusion with supports, to make sure that we're hiring those, especially those young teachers, to have that next generation of professionals in the classroom where we need them. We have done tremendous work to create safe and caring schools here in the province of Alberta, and I thank you for that. Not only have we helped to protect vulnerable kids, but I believe that we have helped to create a more safe and caring environment for all students, and we will continue on with that work over the next 4 years. As we learn about each other, we learned that education is a way to fight ignorance. Education is a way to fight hatred and racism, and it's a way to ensure the prosperity of our students and our province here for now and for the future. And I thank you for helping me on that path that we will continue on with the next government. Thank you.
And now you may applaud all our panelists. I want to thank them all for coming out today. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for the panelists, and we look forward to the next provincial election, and get out and vote. Thank you. I'm Kim Trinacity.